The story begins at the university, where, according to adults, it's a great place to have fun and find a partner. That's why our protagonist worked hard to get in and finally managed to enroll. However, he finds himself in an engineering environment where the classroom is filled with nothing but screws, and there isn't a single girl around. This situation overwhelms him, and he feels lonely with no one by his side. One afternoon, he watches a couple behaving affectionately, perhaps due to the upcoming May festival. Our protagonist, confused, doesn't understand what he's doing wrong. He had previously sought advice from his father on how to get a girlfriend, and his father, with wise words, advised him to be himself, as girls appreciate that more than anything. Despite this advice, the protagonist was not convinced it was true. In a desperate act, he decides to head home, feeling miserable about his current situation. At home, he attended a virtual theater class, one of his passions. The teacher, an attractive woman, left the protagonist mesmerized, leading him to imagine a life shared with someone like her. He even went so far as to fantasize about reading the Bible and going to church together, an idea he found so absurd that he felt crazy for even thinking about it. The next day, the festival at the university was in full swing, but for our protagonist, it wasn't the same. With no plans, he thought about going to a bar that night. Just then, some charming girls approached him and invited him to see a play at the Millennium Auditorium. Initially uninterested, he changed his mind when he learned admission was free. Beyond the girls' beauty, he was intrigued by whether he had seen them before, considering they might be part of a theater club. The two girls with him contributed to his decision to attend, thanking him for it. One mentioned how renowned their club was and hoped he would come to see the play, which embarrassed the protagonist when he noticed how attractive she was. After his classes, he headed to the play, it being his first time and not knowing exactly where it was. Upon arrival, he saw two girls selling popcorn and drinks, deciding to buy some before going in. Once inside, he began to immerse himself in the theatrical experience. The crowd overwhelmed him, and he was surprised at how expensive everything he bought was, even though the play admission was free. The reason was evident. The guides were attractive girls, and he couldn't resist buying something. This was the first time he didn't go straight home, and just as the play was about to begin, Han Lee, the president of the theater club, appeared on stage, confirming the protagonist's suspicions that everyone there was impressively good-looking. Han welcomed them, introduced the play, and was greeted with applause for her beauty. The protagonist started thinking that the theater club was a breeding ground for future celebrities, given how attractive everyone was. The play began, and as it progressed, our protagonist was captivated by the star, Amo Leon. Although he felt the story was a bit cliché, he hoped for an unexpected twist. Meanwhile, Amo showed nervousness about the end of the play. The plot focused on her concern for a sick boy in bed, and her acting partner asked her for one thing: to start by holding his hand. This confused Amo, as it wasn't in the script. Her partner pulled her toward the bed, accusing her of rejecting his love. Amo asked him to stop, as that wasn't part of the show. However, the man did something really strange, impressing even the protagonist, who, though he couldn't see it well from his seat, wished he could witness that peculiar moment in detail. After the lights went out, a boy came out under a single light to say that from that day on, he never saw his friend again and regretted his actions, which left him alone and with nothing. When the lights came back on, the protagonist was the only one truly enchanted by the play, considering it well executed. While the cast thanked the applause, he felt a bit envious, wishing to be as recognized as they were. He also noticed that Amo was not with them during the final bow. Although he wanted to join such a club, he realized they only accepted applications at the beginning of the semester. Not knowing whom to ask, he saw the girls from before who were talking about a date they had with their boyfriend and joking about how well-dressed he was. He interrupted their conversation to ask to join the theater club. The girls were left speechless and a bit embarrassed by their previous comments. The protagonist really wanted to join the club, but it seemed they weren't accepting admission requests, which his companions confirmed. The situation saddened the protagonist, who was about to leave when Han appeared, surprised to learn the girls hadn't finished cleaning up. The protagonist introduced himself to Han, who told him they weren't accepting new members. However, the protagonist didn't give up and expressed his strong desire to join the club. Meanwhile, as he looked at Han, the protagonist couldn't take his eyes off the grandeur of her heart. Han noticed this and thought of using him as a new toy, binding him and announcing a special admission test, asking him to return on Friday after the festival as they would be practicing. The protagonist accepted excitedly, surprising the girls, especially one of them. Later, we see Amo crying. The boy who acted beside her apologized, explaining that he improvised due to a sudden change in the script hours earlier. That same boy was with Han, who was being very affectionate with him, as she wanted to convince him to do something. At the end, Han asked him to keep his promise, leaving him sad for Amo. In the present, the boy apologized to Amo for not wanting to cause her trouble during the play. At that moment, Han arrived, scolding them for not hurrying to clean up. Noticing the boy, she saw he wasn't following her orders and, thinking he was ignoring her, treated him coldly and asked him to leave. Despite his reluctance, Han really didn't want to see him, so she had no choice but to accept and leave. When Han met up with Emily, she handed her a bag of expensive clothes, saying it was a form of compensation. Emily asked why she had changed the script without consulting her, and Han explained it was common in plays, dodging the topic. Finally, the two were left alone, and Han told Amole that this wasn't over, eagerly anticipating what was to come. Friday arrived, and the protagonist was excited to join a club full of attractive girls. Despite his friends' invitations to go out, he declined, as he had matters to attend to that day. His friends didn't understand his enthusiasm, but he was determined. After saying goodbye to his friends, he headed to the club, feeling nervous as he knocked on the door. A sweet voice allowed him to enter, and when he opened the door, he found a beautiful girl waiting for him. Finally, we learn the protagonist's name. In an indifferent manner, the girl informed him that he should wait, as the president had not yet arrived, and told him to do as he pleased if he got bored. He accepted her offer somewhat melancholically. While exploring the place, Han arrived, asking Chloe to buy something and noticing Leon's presence. The protagonist introduced himself again, thanking her for the opportunity. Han kindly asked him to relax and introduced Chloe Park as the vice president, though she didn't seem very pleased. Despite this, under pressure from Han, she introduced herself to the protagonist. This led to him greeting her once again, and Han suggested a special acting test. Chloe seemed confused, as the test was not easy and many newcomers failed it. Han insisted that it was a special evaluation, emphasizing the importance of acting. Although Han was in a hurry to conduct the test, Chloe understood her true intentions, and this time wouldn't allow it. In the auditorium, they handed him the script, and Han would act with him while Chloe evaluated his effort, which she accepted. Although Han was acting well, she was also trying to seduce John during the performance and was succeeding. Despite his efforts to concentrate on his lines, the emotions of the moment were evident on his face. Han's enormous heart further clouded the protagonist's thoughts. Because of this, Chloe decided to stop the performance, scolding John for not doing anything, for which he apologized and promised to act better. He thought he needed to calm down and have confidence in himself, which encouraged him to try again, leaving the girls confused. However, upon seeing Han again, he wondered how he could endure it, as those thoughts prevented him from concentrating. Chloe interrupted the performance again and gave him some advice to calm down and not let his inappropriate thoughts affect him. Ju denied the latter, saying it was supposedly just nerves, leading Chloe to ask Han if they would really continue with the test, something Han didn't appreciate. Chloe argued that she had always said acting was the most important thing for the club, creating a tense moment between them. Han suggested trying it one more time, but this time with Chloe's help, teasing her a bit and giving her one last chance. She warned Soom that he would have to give it his best to succeed. Before starting again, Chloe went to get drinks, and Han took the opportunity to get close to John and ask him to do his best, which he promised to do without hesitation. Meanwhile, Chloe thought everything would be fine with her, as she didn't consider herself attractive. After a while, she returned with the drinks to hand them over before they began. John was nervous, but at the same time, confident in himself. They needed Han to give the green light, and she did so, allowing them to start. Chloe began the performance, catching the protagonist off guard, but he kept up, doing his best. Surprisingly, the protagonist followed Chloe's teachings, leaving her stunned to see that he was a different person. Han congratulated John for his good work, praising his performance. Finally, Chloe accepted John into the club, though she was furious. The president let him go for the moment, welcoming him to the club. Han couldn't believe they had succeeded, feeling a bit lazy to introduce him to everyone. However, in a message, Emmy offered to go with him, which made Han think she was interested in Jeon, but she didn't give it much importance and told John that someone would come for him later. The president introduced Emmy, who was excited to meet the protagonist. Because she was busy, Jana left Emmy in charge of John, who felt somewhat uncomfortable. Nevertheless, the cute redhead started a conversation about how the president and vice president had been with him. Amy took John to tour the place and showed him the equipment room, explaining that some use the darkness for other purposes. Amy, with plans in mind, locked the door, intriguing the protagonist. During the conversation, Emmy revealed that she liked him since she saw him, leaving him blushing. She explained that she had shown him the place because she wanted to propose something. John couldn't believe what was happening and stammered nervously. Despite John's doubts, Emmy kissed him, surprising John, and they shared an intimate moment. It was John's first time reading the Bible, impressing Emmy with his performance. In the end, John apologized for any mistakes, and though Emmy thought he enjoyed it, she noticed his nervousness. However, she allowed him to call her Nuna from that moment on, leaving the protagonist blushing. Before leaving, they had to clean the place, as they had made a mess. But John would remember this place as his first sacred experience with the charming redhead. Emmy felt good after this recital, considering it a good moment. At night, John couldn't stop thinking about his Nuna, Emmy, and the intensity of her gaze, considering that his father might be right after all. The idea of a possible honeymoon with Emmy excited him, as that's how we men, 100% loyal, think. A week later, Emmy informed him that they met every Friday, despite the bad weather with heavy rains. John thought the meeting would be to discuss plans for the next presentation, but Emmy revealed it was just for playing games and having some drinks. When he arrived at the club, John introduced himself to the other members. The guys gave him a warm welcome, asking more about his tastes and accepting him into the pack, as they called it, since he was single. Just guys stuff. Hannah suggested going for meat, despite Chloe's initial resistance, who argued they'd already had meat last week. However, the excuse now was to celebrate the arrival of the new member, and Hannah took the opportunity to tease Chloe a little more. Hannah pressured Chloe to join them. She hesitated, remembering the last time they left her alone while everyone watched. John noticed the good relationship between the two girls. In the group chat, they announced the meeting place, inviting anyone who wanted to attend. They only needed to confirm their presence. There was one person they weren't sure about, which was Amelie. However, she was finally accepted to come along. At the restaurant, they enjoyed some delicious pork, and everyone seemed to be having a good time. At that moment, John noticed the star of the festival, who looked charming even while eating. He approached her to introduce himself and praised her excellent work in the play. However, she didn't take it well, leaving the protagonist confused as he didn't know if he'd said something wrong. At that instant, Emmy arrived, hugged John upon seeing him, and told him she wanted to be close to him, mentioning it felt strange seeing him with Amelie. She took him with her because Hannah was looking for him. He noticed that Amelie looked sad. On the way, John complimented Emmy's beautiful hairstyle and asked her what Hannah wanted. Ami, on the other hand, said that was a lie and wanted to be alone with him, which made the protagonist blush. She hadn't stopped thinking about him since the last time and was interested in knowing if he liked her as much as she liked him. Hearing this, Emmy suggested they read the Bible again, which encouraged the protagonist, who grabbed Emmy tightly and said he wanted to, blushing. Emmy suggested going somewhere else, mentioning the accessible bathroom because of the echo. John thought they might be heard preaching the Lord's word, but Emmy convinced him otherwise, making the protagonist change his mind as his Nuna would now take care of him. It's important to note that before diving into the Bible reading, there were many compliments, gestures, and flirtations between John and Ami. Meanwhile, Hannah was asking Chloe about Lon's whereabouts for obvious reasons. Chloe responded jokingly, as she didn't know where he was, so Hannah grabbed her by the shoulder and asked other girls about his whereabouts. One of the girls present informed her that Emmy had taken him but didn't know where. Hearing this, Hannah connected the situation to the previous guidance and started thinking that Emmy was interested in Jeon. During the Bible reading, John and Emmy prayed so intensely that Emmy fainted for a moment, leaving the protagonist impressed. Initially, John thought she was in pain, but then they realized that, due to the intensity with which they preached the Lord's word, they had made a lot of noise. However, John was more focused on how charming Emmy was. She felt embarrassed about where she'd taken him, and at that moment, she confessed her feelings, impressing Emmy. He wanted to go on a date with her and invited her, but she rejected him. It was an awkward moment for John, who thought he'd ruined things by confessing in a public bathroom, which explained Emmy's refusal. However, Emmy asked him to take it slow, something he understood, then planted a tender kiss on him, leaving him even more confused. Emmy suggested he call her if he got bored, as they would start meeting more often, leaving the protagonist once again mesmerized. On his way out, John didn't know if it was okay to call his Nuna, as he didn't know how to handle the situation. Additionally, he met Emily, who seemed surprised to see him. John confessed they'd met by chance, and Emily apologized for what happened earlier since she wasn't entirely okay. Emily was very respectful and set a clear boundary between them for the moment, which relieved the protagonist as he felt uncomfortable with the situation. He noticed that Amoy also kept a certain distance from the club. Suddenly, a girl was looking for Amo. John was a little startled by her sudden arrival. He didn't remember the girl's name, and to make matters worse, she realized it. He tried guessing her name, but the girl named Amakem angrily told him to remember her name. Emma believed John was interested in Amelie, thinking it might not be a good idea. However, she thought about telling him a secret and didn't think there was any harm. She mentioned to John that something had happened between Jana and Amo, but wasn't sure exactly what it was. John didn't believe her much, thinking she might be a bit tipsy, which made Emma a little upset, and she decided to leave. Nonetheless, John was surprised to hear that Chloe thought highly of him because of his good performance in the show, though it gave the impression the vice president disliked him. He appreciated the congratulations. Alone, he didn't know if he should believe what Emma said about Hannah and Emily. A few days later, John was in the storage room organizing things when he heard Amelie's sweet voice coming from the auditorium. He decided to greet her, and upon leaving, he saw her acting. Amole was so focused that she looked incredibly beautiful to him. Her gestures immersed him in a completely new world, and John felt his skin tingle. It was a completely beautiful show until Amole made a mistake. At that moment, John made a noise that made Amoy realize he was there. Now Amo was a bit flustered because she'd been seen. Although John was apologizing for having seen her in secret, he didn't really know how to react, as he didn't want to be seen without her consent. However, upon hearing John's compliments on how amazing her performance was, and how everything in her was absorbed in the interpretation, changing various aspects, she liked his praise, which made her blush. Jeon continued detailing what she did, encouraging her even more. At that moment, a voice called them. It was the president asking what they were doing. John responded naturally. However, A felt that she was genuinely angry. John also noticed this from the atmosphere, so he nervously explained the entire situation, which didn't seem to work and put them in an awkward position. Despite John's efforts, Hannah was impressed they were practicing and praised their efforts, giving them a moment but asked Joan to see her later. She also felt annoyed seeing them together. When John arrived at the club, Emmy and Chloe were playfully teasing each other. Upon his arrival, John asked about Hannah. Emmy explained she was in the Room of Truth, since apparently anyone who entered there became very kind. John imagined something bad. Ami affectionately suggested they go grab something to eat, but he declined because he had business with the president. Hearing this, Emmy entered a dark mood, thinking something might happen, which took the protagonist by surprise. She was about to go eat with Chloe, but after being rejected again, she stormed off, shouting that she hated everyone and threatening to reveal Chloe's secret to everyone. Chloe quickly went after her, agreeing to go along while yelling. Suddenly, Han was going to scold them, but seeing Jeon, she invited him in, asking him to sit down in a chair. Seeing a bat nearby, he felt a great pressure weighing on him. Han noticed how calm he was and told him she just wanted to discuss a few things with him, as apparently everyone was very kind to Jeon, so much so that she knew his secret with M. This surprised the protagonist, as he didn't think M would have told her, but Han, pressing him for a response and getting none, read his silence. Now she knew his true intentions for joining the club, since he had pretended to be an innocent guy, and now that they were alone, she thought he was a danger, something he denied vehemently, thinking she found him unattractive. John was truly nervous, so he began listing Han's positive qualities, something she insisted he continue, but when he finished, she started laughing, mocking John, which left him feeling uneasy. Now she wanted him to come closer, and of course, upon seeing her generous spirit, his body's instincts gave him away. Han noticed this, as her plan was working, and she wanted to toy with him even more. It should be noted that Han got even closer, giving the impression that the protagonist was provoking her. At that moment, he realized this and didn't know what to do. Before the situation could escalate, Han remembered she had a meal scheduled and struck Jean on the head. Even so, she promised to keep playing with him later, leaving him alone with a headache. As Han left, she noticed Emma there, who appeared nervous and claimed she'd just arrived, though her actions suggested otherwise. Han was slightly concerned, though she didn't pay it much mind, as Emma's actions only increased her suspicions, especially due to her nervousness. A few minutes earlier, Emma had been arriving at the club, noticing the door was open and thinking someone might be there. Entering and finding no one, she found it strange. However, she noticed a jacket and a noise coming from the back, so she decided to investigate a little further. She overheard Han's voice in a conversation with John about Emmy, which was unimaginable for Emma, as she couldn't believe her friend would do something like that with a guy like him. She also faintly heard Jay's voice. Just as they were about to leave, she discreetly returned to her place. Nervous, she felt like the only pure-hearted girl left in the university, as the others only pretended to be so. She tried to act as if she hadn't seen anything. When John came out and saw the two girls chatting, he once again forgot Emma's name. Though he wanted to remember it, she was lost in thought, wondering how someone like him, a loser, could be with the president. After Han excused herself and apologized to John for the bump, leaving them alone, John invited Emma to eat, but she declined. It was clear she was acting strangely, mainly because she felt lonely at 20. The next day, John messaged Emmy, who was playfully teasing him. Though John was concerned about her behavior from the day before, he wasn't sure if he should call her. Finally, he decided to dial, thinking he might invite her on a date. When she answered, John quickly explained that the meeting had ended early, and if he'd known, he would have joined her to grab something to eat. Though Emmy was a bit distant, John suggested they go out since he was feeling bored. Emmy thought he wanted a date, but seeing he wasn't very assertive, she wasn't willing to accept. It was then John assured her it was indeed a date, and Emmy became really excited. However, she told him that it wouldn't be possible that day since she was busy. John proposed they go out the next day, as he had no plans and would be free. Enthusiastic, Emmy accepted and promised to dress nicely for their date, which thrilled John. With that, their date was set. Hanging up, John felt truly in love and happy about the prospect of spending time with his Nuna, while Emmy was charmed by John's sweetness. The next day, John was waiting for Emmy when she suddenly arrived from behind. For once, Emmy would lead the date. They decided to go eat first, choosing a restaurant where they enjoyed a delicious meal. Afterward, Emmy joked, saying she was so full she was about to explode, though she was actually still a bit hungry. Leaving the restaurant, she was a bit disappointed for having forgotten her coupon at home, but decided they could use it another time. She tried holding John's hand under the excuse of being cold, finally succeeding. John noticed that Emmy looked even prettier than usual, and while he didn't know if he minded having their hands like this, he was actually fascinated. As they walked, Emmy wanted to know why he'd invited her on a date. Though John told her he just wanted to see her, she didn't entirely believe him. Her joy was somewhat unusual since he'd been around the president, something John confirmed, mainly because she'd hit him on the head. Nevertheless, he insisted he'd been with her, then called her, which seemed suspicious to Emmy. It was at that moment John expressed that he regretted not accompanying her that day and that he missed her, apologizing if he made her feel bad. This surprised Emmy, as she found it a bit funny, though she accepted his apology. Since the weather was nice, they wanted to make the most of it, visiting different places and having a good time. They eventually found a multi-purpose room. Ami explained what it was for, but John thought people used them for impure things, which she denied, though she actually had a desire to do something like that, making the protagonist blush, but Emmy was enthusiastic. Inside, the room was larger than they'd expected. John asked what they'd do first, and Emmy suggested singing, something John wasn't very good at, though Emmy cheered him on. She was actually teasing him a bit since it was his first time. As they sang and had fun, Emmy suddenly became very affectionate, which made John nervous but wanting to stay with her. They continued singing, and Emmy asked about what had happened with Han. After a few songs, they forgot about it. John, however, kept complimenting Emmy, which she liked. Now they only had 10 minutes left before their time in the room was up, so they would keep singing a bit longer. Before that, Emmy wanted to ask a question, as the topic was really important to her, so she was going to ask John a question he would answer sincerely. Hearing it was about what happened with Han on Friday left him cold. Although Emmy didn't seem too interested, she expected him to respond. There was no turning back now for John. So he told his Nuna everything, surprising her, as she had a smile at the end since it was unexpected that Han had hit him on the head, joking about how hard it was. However, she knew Han was playing with him, which made John nervous. Ani tried to encourage him, thinking she could pretend she didn't know anything about Han, but if she continued bothering John, she would give her a good beating.